7 is not exactly positive. I think a better way to think about it, or at least how I think about it, is it's like I more have an issue with metabolizing negativity, right? And what that causes is like you basically just procrastinate darkness. You're trying to reframe constantly what's going on in your life or like in the world or whatever, and that takes up a lot of energy, and it does cause anxiety, and it does cause you to whatever. That's when the skimming like comes into play.
Welcome to another episode of What It's Like to Be You. My name is Josh Levine, your host. This is a show where I interview people about their experience as their Enneagram type. Today, my guest is Ikraam Ali. She is a type 7 who does community work and works also in local politics. And I want to set this conversation up by framing it in terms of what we sometimes call in the Enneagram the harmonic groups. So the harmonic groups are 3 groups of 3, just like there always are in the Enneagram. We have the emotional realness triad, the competence triad, and the positive outlook triad. 7 is a positive outlook type, but let's start with the emotional realness triad. So we have the 4, 6, and 8 emotional realness, which have a psychological need to look under the surface of things, to call it like they see it, to quote unquote be real. And they want to also be met by a certain kind of realness in you. That's what settles their own nervous system. We have the competence types, the 1, 3, and 5, which have a psychological need to be quote-unquote sober, objective, reasonable, to diagnose cleanly situations and come up with solutions. And we also have the positive outlook types, which have a psychological need to, you might say, look on the bright side of something or hold in their head the positive vision of something or the light at the end of the tunnel. So that's the 2, 9, and 7. And you can think of the harmonic triads as the ways that we approach conflict and difficulty in our lives and our relationships. I love these conversations that contradict stereotypes that we have of the Enneagram types. And this conversation really did that for me, in part because we focused a lot on negativity itself. And there was a big part of the conversation we talked about a time in which Ikraam was depressed and how she worked through that depression and how, in a sense, it inspired and informed a huge part of her professional trajectory. And we also talk about aspects of the Enneagram that are dark and expose the shadow side of things and how she approaches and deals with that. And in the context of all that, just how she holds negativity, how she experiences negativity, and experiences being a 7 in the context of seeing a lot of negativity in her world. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I respect Ikraam a lot for her capacity in real time to go into the territory that we went in this conversation. So without further ado, please welcome my new friend, Ikraam. Welcome, everyone, to another interview. I am really excited to be with my new friend, Ikraam, today. Ikraam is a social sexual 7, 7 with a 6 wing, and trifix 793. So, hello, Ikraam. How are you?
Hey, what's going on?
Good. Let's start with, can you share with us your Enneagram origin story? And I know that you kind of got into it via personality typing from a whole different other system. So just how did you get into personality typing in general? And then how did you find the Enneagram?
It's a long story. I think I've always just been very interested in archetypes. I wonder if that's a head type thing, just like finding safety in concepts. So I was really into astrology as like a little kid, and I would read like all the Cosmo magazines and whatever. I'm a Cancer, but obviously like I didn't really like ever understand it fully. So that was to the side of whatever. And then I got into like palm reading. I got into everything, anything that would like help me kind of understand people, but nothing ever really quite fit. And then I think in high school, I found MBTI, got into that. That didn't quite fit, whatever. I couldn't really figure it out. And then randomly, I think I must have been like 20, 21. I was like watching a YouTuber, and then they mentioned the Enneagram, and they linked a podcast. I think they linked like Ian Cron's podcast.
Okay.
I know the Enneagrammer guys are like not the biggest fans of him, but I did like, I went through the entire thing. Found it really interesting. The reason I was so interested in personality type is I was actually just trying to figure out my entire family, like especially my mom, who's like this enigma to me. She's a very like powerful person, but really sweet, and then also kind of mean. and whatever. And then I remember when I really like bought into the Enneagram is when they did the description of 8. And I was like, that's my freaking mom. Like, holy shit.
I
and
see. Yeah.
but I could never really land for my type. And then fast forward years later, I just stumbled onto the Facebook group for Enneagrammer, and then that's when everything clicked for me.
This could be the lens that I'm bringing to this conversation, just because I have a preconceived idea of 7, but I am tuning into this word like stumbling onto, or the way that you kind of dabbled in astrology and MBTI, and then you find the Enneagram, and it's kind of like, it sounds like you kind of taste tested a bunch of different things, and then
Yeah, I guess so.
well,
Now that you
yeah,
pointed out, yeah. I think it's just wildly interesting. Everyone knows that people are fucking weird, and I never really understood exactly why we are the way we are. And it's just been like something that's always been worrying in the background. Like, what the fuck is? I find people very beautiful and fascinating, and complex. And I know a lot of people find themselves really boring, which is interesting to me because I feel like even the boring people are fucking really interesting in their boringness. So yeah, I guess I definitely dabbled, because I also have this thing where like just things sometimes click for me and nothing was really clicking, but I knew that there was something there. So yeah, I kind of landed on the Enneagrammer, and I'm kind of staying here and this other system OPS because I feel like
yeah,
those two things, like I can tell that they're legit. Um, yeah.
uh-huh. So how deep have you gone, and like where are you at with either of those systems or both of them, and your own journey in understanding what typology is?
So when I did my initial deep dive on the Enneagram, I actually did go pretty intense. I think I read every freaking published book I could find, in my city. And I listened to all the podcasts and all that. And
On OPS or the Enneagram?
the Enneagram, OPS, it
The
doesn't really
Enneagram,
have
yeah.
anything published. Yeah,
I see.
OPS is kind of,
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
Um, but since
Wow, so
after,
it really captured you. I find that interesting.
yeah, really,
That
I thought about
yeah.
flying out to this huge meetup in Italy, that big conference, like the IEA, whatever. I'm probably
Yeah, yeah.
forgetting. Yeah. Um, yeah, it did really capture my attention. Oh, the other thing is my best friend in the freaking world, is this really crazy, unique human being. And I noticed that like the first day I ever met her, we met in social studies class and she gave a speech, whatever. She was really, really quiet, never talks, like whatever. But she
Mhm.
gave this speech and it was so freaking fascinating, so beautiful. And I knew that her brain worked in a way that I've never seen before. I've never seen somebody so fucking intelligent, smart, whatever, and also like very differentiated. Um, and so yeah, after getting to the Enneagram, seeing my mom's an 8, I realized she's a 5, and that also was a huge thing. And she got typed in Enneagrammer as well, and she's like a 541. So
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's just it makes me understand really complex people that I love a lot, and I don't know if it's a head type thing. I'm almost positive it's a head type thing, but I find like safety in concepts and being able to understand things, and taking like I don't know. It's just I find it beautiful. So yeah.
Yeah. Okay, there's a few things about just your journey with typology itself that is interesting to me from the point of view of the 7, which is,
Mhm.
we think of the 7 as, well, some schools of thought call it the enthusiast, and there's the sense of, um, as I referred to before, taste testing and trying lots of different things, taking a sampling approach to life.
Mhm.
And then there's this beautiful thing that happens with 7s when something really captures their full selves. The 7 line to 5 is the capacity for 7s to focus on something, which isn't like trying to put a straitjacket on myself and focus. That's really the 7 line to 1. But it's
Yeah.
the sense of opening to a deeper curiosity that is compelling me towards something that feels beautiful and satiating and like to become saturated with this thing. And it feels to me like that's kind of what this interest is for you. Like you read a lot of books, you're pretty deep into these communities, and you become relatively fluent with the Enneagram relatively quickly. Seems to me.
Yeah, I would say so. Satiated is a really good word, I think,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't know. The line to five is interesting, and I don't know if I exactly get it, but I think I have an idea.
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel it more in my anxiety. You know what I mean? So it's like when I'm skimming and when I'm like whatever eating junk food and not being satiated, like
Uh-huh.
obviously the anxiety is up, and it just feels like I'm doing shit to distract myself and just like masturbate mentally. You know, like
Yeah.
it's not something that's like necessarily going to change my freaking life or whatever, but it's like a very interesting distraction or like a thought exercise or whatever. But the line to I think five or the satiating type of knowledge, I think that's shit that I think is going to actually. Can I swear here? Sorry, I didn't ask.
Yes, you don't. It's fine.
Okay.
She says 10 minutes into the interview after having dropped a bunch of swords. Yes, you totally
Really?
can. Yes,
Okay.
you totally can. It's fine.
Okay. Um, um, oh my gosh. I don't know why I feel like I'm in a job interview. I'm like, okay, be good. Don't be a fucking trash bag. Like, try to keep it together. Just feel like, um, but yeah. What was I saying?
We were talking about
Satiating. Yes.
satiating. Yeah.
Yes. So, yeah. I guess the knowledge that I feel like you can kind of build on and actually use to navigate your life and see the world as it is without the positive spin to it. Or it's not, I don't know if seven positivity is exactly positive, but it's like whimsical. It's, I don't
Mm-hmm.
know. It's like, this might be true. It might not be. Who the fuck cares? Like something like that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I definitely think that the Enneagram's kind of depressing, you know, if you really think about it. It's like not this like
Uh-huh.
super positive thing. It's actually pretty horrifying. I remember I thought I was a six. I kind of thought I was a seven, but I kind of didn't. Like when I joined Enneagrammer and like I saw all the Pinterest boards, I was like, oh, like from the vibes of these people, I'm somewhere in the 6-7 area. Possibly I'm a nine, but when I got typed to seven, like, oh god, like it was so horrifying because I was thinking that I'm probably a six. Obviously, I'm a freaking anxious person. I think anyone can tell you that. Like, I'm like a little bit neurotic, but I'm like, oh, but I found a way to be like positive and like get myself out of it and reframe and da da da. And it's like, oh my gosh, like that's my whole fucking like that's my whole gig as a seven. Like, if you think about the Enneagram, or at least the way I think about it, it's like life is terrifying and our type is just a coping mechanism for how we deal with the terror of like death, of things might not meaning anything or whatever. And it's
Uh-huh.
like, damn, like what I thought was transcendent, like I believed, it's like a deep held belief. It's not just like, oh, like I like being positive. It's like a deep held belief that I should be enjoying my time here on earth or whatever. And I should like direct my consciousness in like towards getting that. Like
Mm-hmm.
to figure out that that's kind of like, yeah, my neuroses, that was like nerve wracking. So I wouldn't say the Enneagram is exactly like a fun hobby. It's like a kind of a horrifying one, you know, if you think about it too much.
Yeah. Well,
Hmm.
I am really fascinated by this point you're bringing up that the
Hmm.
Enneagram is depressing, but it also captures your fascination. And,
Yeah,
um,
because if
well,
you think
you're,
about it, oh, go ahead.
well, I just want to frame just in a basic pedagogy way. Like we're talking about seven as a positive outlook type, and
Hmm.
also as a head type, meaning as an anxious type,
Hmm.
and how seven deals with the fundamental anxiety. And I'm curious to get into what your experience of anxiety is and your description of yourself as an anxious person and all that. That's interesting to me as well. But particularly this word depressing that you use, like the Enneagram is a depressing system. I mean,
Do you not think
that's an
it's
interesting.
depressing?
Well, I
I'm
think
just
it's.
curious. Okay.
Let me. How do I actually think about it? Let's see. How I think about it is that it is. It's really holding, in a beautiful way, the polarity of our shadow and our gift. excuse me. And yes, it's depressing in the sense that, I mean, it kind of, if you're not embarrassed or horrified in a sense when you discover your type, you're kind of not doing it right, in my opinion. But
Yeah, just like
also,
mistyped.
yeah, but also there is the, one of the overemphasis on shadow can be, well, that can be overdone. Either pole can be overdone, in my opinion. But
That's for
it's just
sure.
interesting to me in this conversation that you're focusing on the depressing aspect of the Enneagram as a 7. And so,
Yeah.
how do you place that, or what's your? Yeah, you go now.
I don't. Yeah, no, it's okay. um. Okay, the way I see it, at least for my type structure, and I'm kind of seeing that with other people's, it's like
Uh huh.
we have this one goal, right? Which is like I really resonated. Oh my god, that was such a terrible day. The day that I listened to the object relations podcast, and they got to the
Yeah.
part of 7, and I was like, damn,
Yeah.
like this really is my story. This story of like I was deprived in life, and like now it's up to me to make sure that I fucking finally like have my day. No one rain on my parade. Whatever. I'm gonna nourish myself. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's like a that's not just like a I don't know. It's not like this passing thought. Like that's like a core root of like my story and like my narrative going all the time. I'm not going to speak for all 7s. I'm just going to try to speak for myself because I'm sure some
Sure.
people would disagree. But so I find that really really sad because you have that right, but 7 is a frustration type. Like I'm trying to be happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And 7 is not exactly positive. I think a better way to think about it, or at least how I think about it, is it's like I more have an issue with metabolizing negativity, right? And
Yeah.
what that causes is like you basically just procrastinate darkness and all this shit. And so it's like you're trying to reframe constantly what's going on in your life or like in the world or whatever, and that takes up a lot of energy, and it does cause anxiety, and it does cause you to whatever. That's when the skimming like comes into play and stuff, because it's just like if you have all this like pain like built up, like obviously yeah, like let me just try to stay above water. So it makes you like a
Mm-hmm.
kind of a nervous person, like whatever, manic seeming or whatever, I don't know. um, and it, like if you're really into your personality, like if you're in your personality structure, like you will become a miserable person. um, so I kind of see that with all the types, like you're actively working against your goal because you're so caught up in your personality structure, and it makes me like
Yes, that's
sad
right.
for people. Yeah.
Yes.
Hmm.
You in our previous conversation, you used the phrase 7s are really well. Actually, I'm not sure that you made this as a general statement about all 7s, but you said something like, um, "I'm really a depressed person trying to stay up,"
Yeah. Yeah.
or something like that. Um, and it struck me that, like, first of all, your use of the word depression as a descriptor was almost itself lightly held, but also I
Hmm.
could feel a depth to it. Like there was something about the way that you said the word that was like, "Whoa, is that itself like a skimming over of something?" Anyway, my point is that
Yeah.
or actually, is that true? Do you want to go there?
No, it's true. No, I was just taking
Yeah,
it in. I was just like, you're right. Yeah, yeah, I get that. Um,
yeah,
yeah, I think it's just like you said, the shadow, right? You spend so much time trying to avoid or just being hypersensitive towards negativity. And I don't know, negativity is not the right word. Just like even being bored, or being
yep,
bland or whatever, not interesting, all that shit. You just have,
mm-hmm.
like you said, a bunch of frustration. Yeah, like you're gonna like that causes you to be kind of negative because you just see all the shit that can be improved in your life or improved in your experience. Nothing's ever enough. Um,
Yeah,
and you look at other people and you're also just like, okay, like I don't want to be like you, like you seem whatever more stable or more happy or whatever, but
mhm.
you also just it's almost like you gave up in life. I don't know if that's a frustration type thing, but I'm like, oh, you fucking gave up. Like you gave up on actually trying to like be happy. I don't want to be like you or be interesting.
Yeah.
I don't know. So it's just like that's a lot of negativity, and I do feel negative. Like I felt negative most of my life, but and that's why I never would have typed myself a 7 when I was reading the old Enneagram books. But I know that from the outside, like a lot of people would say like I'm positive or happy or whatever. And I know that I also like to try to keep myself up. Like I have that like whatever quality to myself. Like let's keep the
Mm-hmm.
show rolling, baby, you know? But yeah,
Uh-huh.
I don't think internally I feel, super positive. um yeah. I'm sure there's
Part of why,
people who are definitely
yeah,
more miserable than me though.
sure.
Yeah.
Part of what I love about this part of the conversation is that
Mhm.
just really digging into 7 as a frustration type,
Mhm.
and this word frustration, it's so obvious to me in the 1 and the 4. And so, ones are like you can feel their frustration and they're trying to fix
Mhm.
stuff, and for 4s you can definitely feel their frustration, and they're
Mhm.
doing their they're identified so much with their frustration. But the
Mhm.
7 has always been a little bit of like like how does that exactly square? And I kind of get it cerebrally, but there's the sense that 7s aren't as much identified with their frustration, or they're trying like frustration itself is a form of negativity that 7s are trying to get away from. And so
Mhm.
it's like both the engine that's driving me, and also it's a thing that I'm trying to suppress beneath my consciousness.
Yeah.
That's one way to frame it. Does that land for you, or um
I think at
yeah,
times
go
I
ahead.
actually
Uh-huh.
had like a lot of pride with my frustration, whatever.
Uh-huh.
I don't know. How do I describe it?
Actually, let me
Mhm. Go
say
ahead.
one other thing. What I
Mhm.
just said might not be true from the point of view of, suppressing my frustration is maybe more of a 9 sensibility. But
Mhm.
there's certainly a response to frustration, or like frustration exists internally. My experience of 7s is that it exists internally as a kind of springboard or trampoline.
Yes.
you know,
Yes, it's
you
the
know,
engine that keeps the whole thing going. Yeah.
yeah, it's like whoop, frustration, bounce, and then off I go into, looking up out to the horizon. The next thing that's gonna whatever do the thing for
Yes,
me.
that's
Yeah.
a great way to describe it. I think frustration is kind of the engine of 7. It's why it's an assertive type because
Mm-hmm.
you're pushing yourself out into the world. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I'll give like a small cultural reference, for the viewers.
Sure.
But like, if anybody has ever listened to like Kid Cudi's like "Man on the Moon," whatever album, it's very depressing. And it starts really depressing, but towards like, and I
So is
feel
Kid
like
Cudi a
even
7?
in Kid Cudi is a 7. He's a seven
Yeah.
wing six social sexual. Yeah.
Okay.
Um.
Got it.
So Kid Cudi is a 7 wing six. And his album "Man on the Moon," you can go through every song, and it's like it's quite sad. He talks about like I don't know. It's a lot of frustration. It's a lot of sadness. But in every freaking like the end of each song, there's some kind of, or even in the music, the instrumentals and stuff. There's something like uplifting, poignant, or whatever, interesting about the
Yeah.
tracks.
Yeah.
And towards the very end of the album, like it ends on a high note. Like I'm gonna be better. I'm gonna be better. Like, like things are gonna get better. And that's the future orientation of 7. That's why I feel like it's not exactly. It's like the positive. Like you're searching for positivity, but the positivity is always in the future. So all you get is frustration. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, that's kind of yeah the sad part I think of the 7. It's just like I don't know, yeah, being unsatisfied with what's going on right
Yeah.
now. Hmm.
So, what gets you going? Like, and I guess I dropped that phrase here because when we talked last time, there was this. You were talking about how basically like what motivates you to do anything is the promise of something, the promise of fill in the blank. You know, like
Yeah, something better.
that yeah, the what Kid Cudi's songs are structurally doing is precisely that thing. It's like there's, you know, I'm describing my shitty circumstance and I'm looking to the future, envisioning the possibility of something more amazing.
Yes,
And
yes.
and the promise of
And
that
then
is
yeah,
what's yeah, go ahead.
go ahead.
You
And
go.
it's
You
like
go.
and it's like he's describing his shitty circumstance, like he's so frustrated with his shitty circumstance that he can't even really tell it the way it is. Like that's something that sixes are really good at, and I really admire them for. But it's like seven, there has to be like some kind of like tilt or whatever. If you listen to his music, it's like super imaginative or whatever, and he talks about himself like almost a little bit detached, like he's a different character or whatever. He describes
Hmm.
himself in third person in some songs and stuff. So it's like so frustrated that you can't even really look at the thing, you know? Um, yeah, and then the
Mm,
promise of good is in the future.
yeah.
Yeah.
I have to say one thing. Part of I'm just sort of amazed by our conversation so far from the point of view of that it's kind of negative. You know, it's kind of
Yeah.
like we're and I'm speaking to you, a social sexual seven, and so I like that from the point of view it's contradicting a stereotype, but also how are you feeling right now? I wonder, being kind of swimming in this negativity that we've put in front of us.
This is how I always am. So I think anybody who talks to me long enough knows that like I just talk about fuck, life is so trash. Like fuck, like I don't know.
Huh?
So yeah, I don't know.
But
I try to make
but you
jokes.
also
It's also just like, you know, life is trash
yeah.
a little bit, but like I don't know, there you also just get to live it and you're going to die at one day, nothing really fucking matters anyway. So it's fine.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Yeah. I feel like
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
Um, what I also just I'll notice one other thing about you, which is that there is a way that you hold this conversation with a somatic buoyancy. It's like there's like yeah, we're being negative, but it's I don't get the sense that it's gonna really bring you down. You know what I'm saying? Like
Mhm.
it's maybe if I were talking to a 4 or a 6 or a 9 or something like there'd be a more of a sense of like really resting or like moving into the negativity and just like getting our hands dirty with all the muck. But there's just a different quality with you of it being a little more Teflon. Do you know what I mean by that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like non-stick, you know? Um,
Yeah.
and that's just I'm really just tuning into an energy. It's not anything that necessarily that you're saying, but it's like, and do you experience that energy on the inside? Does it feel like an accurate read?
Yes, yes. So, um I think for me the it's kind of hard to say that I focus on positivity. I know that I kind of there's some part of me that does because I'm looking to like I kind of want to just see the thing. Maybe that's my six wing. Like I want to see the thing for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I actively like have been burned from like being like a little bit more of a Pollyanna when I was like a kid or whatever. But even then,
A little bit
actually,
more of
even
a
then, I was reading Pollyanna. Like
what does that mean?
I don't know. I don't. Is that a Canadian term? I'm not sure.
It
It's
could
just
be.
like goody two shoes, or it's not exactly. It's like gullible about the world, or whatever.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, but even then, actually, when I was a kid, my journals were depressing as hell. But I was also always interested, and I do think I experienced great joy as well. You know, I think I
Mm-hmm.
experienced the spectrum of emotions. I think the sevenness of me or whatever is that I am like fixated on keeping things interesting. Like I think, for example, for this interview, um, I don't mind if it's sad. I hope you don't mind too much if it's sad. I would mind if it was like incredibly boring. You know, that would be terrible, and I would be like wanting to die. Like it was like a boring interview. You know, but
Oh, that's a really important distinction right there. That's a
really,
beautiful distinction, actually. Yeah, I think. I mean, so the conversation has emotion to it. It's sparkly. It's interesting. Yes, the content is negative, but there is emotion to it.
Sparks flying in your brain, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
It's stimulating. It's a stimulating conversation.
Yes.
But if it were slower and more lugubrious and boring, then what?
I don't know. Um, I would have to exit. I would just fucking turn this off. No, I'm kidding. Um, I don't know. I like, okay, so I'll tell you a little bit of a story of me, I guess, being a seven or a frustration type.
Mm-hmm.
But we would have to every once in a while, whatever. When my mom was like on a religious kick, she would take us to the mosque like on Fridays, and we would like listen to religious lectures and all that stuff. And like,
Mm-hmm.
there was nothing wrong with them, you know. They were super, I don't know, just regular stuff that you probably would experience in like Sunday school or whatever. Just like, oh, be a good person, and then like stories about the prophet and whatever.
Sure.
It's just incredibly boring. It's incredibly boring. And I remember literally sobbing, like crying in the bathroom. Um, and I forced her, like, not like, I really begged her and forced her not to like make me go to that ever again. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Meanwhile, like, I've experienced stuff on the opposite side of the spectrum, like just hearing like I remember I had this one aunt who's like kind of crazy, and she would, like, I had to stay with her for like a summer or something. She would just like listen to this fucking all this shit about like how you're gonna burn in hell, and it's like super vivid, and it's like I remember being scared. And I remember all that, but I kind of like low key was enjoying it because it's like I was like, it's scaring me, it's giving me nightmares, I'm having anxiety, but like that's like I didn't have like that huge like emotional reaction of like I need to get the fuck out of here, like please never send me here again. More, it was more like, what the
Mm-hmm.
like, this is, people are insane, like that was kind of the vibe. So I don't know if
Mm-hmm.
that's like an interesting or like whatever, a distinction that makes sense to you, but
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
it's a beautiful and important one, I think. And I'll put
Mhm.
some other framing on it. I think, a lot of times the seven is taught in terms of avoiding negativity, and that's partly what we've been talking about, but it's kind of not exactly that. It's something different. It's like that feeling of being trapped, like having to sit and listen to boring stories, and
Mhm.
the reaction that you had to that, like begging your mom, please never take me there again, I never want to do
Mhm.
that again.
Mhm.
That's, I mean, I can feel
And
the
meanwhile, I'm like totally down to hear like the story about like freaking iron being melted and then being poured into your ears because you listen to music by this my fucking crazy aunt. Like, I'm totally down with that. Like, this is kind of
yeah,
metal, but like I don't want to hear the same freaking lecture every week. Like, I'm on the brink.
sure.
Yeah.
Well, there's two things about that. One is that the story of hellfire and brimstone is interesting, exciting, stimulating, and um, it's something to it's engaging, something to play around with,
Mm-hmm.
um, and it's not really touching you. Like it's not. It doesn't seem to me that those stories felt. I don't know. I mean, well, you tell me. Were they? My sense of you telling of that story is that it didn't feel like the threat of hellfire and brimstone was personal to you. Like it wasn't immediate in the moment, like, oh, I'm going to be punished or something like that.
I actually would disagree. Like, I did have like a
Okay.
lot of religious anxiety. Like, I
Oh, I
did,
see. Okay, you did. Yeah.
yeah. So that's
Let
what I
me.
mean. Like, it was actively hurting me, and I was still like kind of cool with it. Yeah.
Interesting. That's interesting. Let me paint just by contrast the distinction about so between that versus sitting in the same boring stories week after week,
Mhm.
like the actual experience in a somatic way of like you being in a room like with nothing to do, like there's nothing to play with, there's nothing interesting going on, and you are fundamentally trapped there for the duration of time that your mom is making you be there.
Yeah.
um that that produces in you a more powerful allergic reaction.
Mhm. Mhm.
You know, it's like a different level of existential terror. And it brings me to my personal names for the types are the seeker of something. Like I call the 3 the value seeker, and my word for the 7 is the freedom seeker. And the what I'm trying to do there is use a name for like the essential quality of that type. And freedom I arrived at only after I tried words like the joy seeker, the delight seeker, things like that. And it just seems to me that freedom is a more accurate term, or it's pointing to this thing that we're talking about here, right?
Yeah.
It's not
Yeah.
that your allergy isn't activated by negative stories. It's activated by experiences that feel like they're not going to go anywhere, that they're stale. You're going to be trapped here forever. It's not going to have an end, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Does that feel
It
right to
makes
you?
it does feel right. It does feel right. And now that I'm thinking about this more, this is actually a story me and my best friend have in common. The one who's a 5. She also has like a
Mm-hmm.
story of like, going to church and, like being so bored. She cried. She was like, I really don't want to go back, you know?
Uh-huh.
So I kind of, now that I'm thinking about it, I kind of wonder if it's just like sixes are able, because like all head types, I think we truly do live in our minds, and the way I envision my mind is like whatever sparks going off, or like, I don't know, mental masturbation is a good whatever like phrasing for it. And I think fives is just a lot more deep, like just they're deep wells. I think sixes are the ones who are like actually know what's going on. Like I'm reading the autobiography of Malcolm X, who I believe is a 6. Do you know for
Yeah.
sure?
Yeah. I think so.
I believe he's, yeah. So he's a 6, and the one thing I'm so like, it's a great book, of course, but like one thing I'm so impressed by with sixes is just like how in tune they are with what's going on with them. Um, and it's just like I do kind of feel like a little bit cut off from what's like, not like a 5, because 5s are a withdrawn type, and they're so individuated. But I think with 7 it's just like I'm on my own different roller coaster, you know what I mean? Like I'm not exactly, I don't really know what's going on. So for example, with um that example with just going to the mosque or the church or whatever, it's like I depend on my mind to escape, and if you're not stimulating me, like I don't know what to do. Whereas a 6 is able to engage with whatever's going on and have some kind of opinion, and be a little bit more tuned in. That would be my guess. Yeah.
That's a really cool distinction.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That actually, oh, that's fascinating. Yeah. I'm going to log that one away to think about later, because I do notice, I'm always amazed how 6s are willing and able to engage with whatever the conversation is. And they
Yes.
have things to say about it, and they're willing to just
Yes.
jump in and whatever's that's fascinating to say. Yeah. And you're right. There's a sense of 7s. It's like, well, if this conversation isn't doing it for me, then
I'm
I don't know, I'm
freaking
out of
gone,
here. Or yeah.
Yeah. And then that kind of makes
Mm-hmm.
sense with 6s, right? Because their entire thing is, I mean, they have this quality of like really questioning like authority and what is being taught, and what are we like, this is wrong because you're swaying
Mm-hmm.
people this way. It's because they themselves are kind of like, they're responsible to engage with whatever is going on, whatever
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
in their environment, and they're attaching mentally, which is
This
interesting.
is an amazing, attachment versus frustration in the mental center. Like
Hmm.
that's what that just was. That's a really cool distinction.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, Let me just pause and take a breath here. I'll say one other thing, actually.
Hmm.
My experience of myself in this conversation with you is that, kind of like in the conversation I had with Jess, the 5,
Hmm.
there's a way that I can feel my inner location moving up into my head. Like
Oh.
this is a conversation in which I am engaging somewhat symbolically. And so I'm just taking a moment to kind of breathe back into my body here.
Mhm.
Um, can we come back to the metabolizing negativity piece?
Mm-hmm.
of the 7,
Mm-hmm.
and just talk about like, do you have an example of something that you needed to metabolize and either didn't or eventually did, and that just the process of that for you, what that was like, why it was hard, all that stuff?
Yeah, I think. Uh, okay, I'll share. I think something that happened like around 19 or 20. Like I had like a huge like depressive episode, and I've like kind of been a downer always, but like I've never actually experienced like real depression. I think that was my
Mm-hmm.
first experience with it when I was 19, and looking back, thinking about the causes of that, why that happened, it's very quite bizarre because at that point, like my life was going pretty good. Like for once, like there was nothing like super bad happening.
Mm-hmm.
Not to say that my life was like full of strife and depression. Like I don't want to go too far with that, but like I did experience like a lot of challenges when I was younger, just with seeing negativity that was surrounding other people, and just like if you think 7 is kind of like wanting to escape hardship, I think I was not in a situation that would really help that out. Like I was surrounded by a bunch of hardship. Um, so how do I talk about this? Yeah, so basically, I think when I was like 11 or 12, we moved into this neighborhood while my mom was like saving up for her first business. That was like kind of like it's like kind of poor or whatever, and we went to the school where it was like half poor kids, half rich kids because of just the area. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess that was my first like introduction to just like fucking how unfair life is. Because even though I was living there, I had a lot of privileges because obviously my mom was just there to like save money. So we were like kind of we were living below our needs and stuff. So we were like safe and all that
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And I knew that at one point we would leave and just. But then you seeing everyone else and just like I don't know. It just seems like a lot of people are dealt like a really fucking hard hand in life. And just I don't know. It's not fair. Um, and I think the way I dealt with that when I was younger is I just totally kind of tried to ignore it or reframe it so much so that I wasn't prepared for the future
Mm-hmm.
consequences of basically the stuff that was happening with my friends' lives. Um, and so, how do I get deeper with this? I don't know. We just grew up. I ended up moving. We whatever moved to the suburbs. She started her business, whatever. And like a bunch of the kids I grew up with, like started going to jail. I think one kid I went to junior high with got freaking knifed. This
Mm-hmm.
other kid was like a standby. He was standing by. Whatever. He was put to jail. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and there's like some racial profiling there, or whatever, because he wasn't even the fucking guy who stabbed him. He was just like a passerby, and he was the only one who got to jail. The other kids, again, were from the richer side of the neighborhood, and I think their parents just bought them a fucking plane to Costa Rica, and they were like, I don't know, they escaped the law because they had money, um, and and just like even stuff with my household. Like there's like a lot of mental health issues with people, and I wasn't really like I straight up was like not even really like believing in that thing where that's kind of where the conspiracy theory of 7 comes in and stuff. I'm like, I don't really who's to say like bipolar's a thing or like schizophrenia. I don't know if that's a real thing, whatever. Anyway, um so by the time I got older, obviously I had spent so much time building up this image of what everyone's life is going to turn out to be. um
Mm-hmm.
and it didn't pan out, like obviously. And so what the
You had a
fuck
vision
is there?
of you had a 7-ish vision of positive outcomes for everyone else.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I just thought things were going to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it was just, it goes back to that procrastinating, like sadness, so much
Mm-hmm.
effort and so much time, like building this. It's like, because it's not just like set it, like, whatever. It's just like, and it's not like purely just delusional where like everything's going to be fine, but it's also just like kind of thinking about all the ways that it could be fine, like, oh, if they make this thing and they could do this, and then they have this opportunity and they're kind of good at this, and so they could go this way. And I don't know. And having none of that pan out, like you spend so much fucking man hours doing that, so much time like having the blinders on, and then just everything just getting decimated, just made me really depressed about the state of the world, just in general. I don't know if the world's any harder than it was in its entire history, but just like I think life just in general is quite negative, and it's not fair. So yeah, I think that was my first time like fully like sinking into that feeling. And maybe the 7 part actually catastrophize things a little bit more. I've thought about that a few times. So just doesn't feel like I can handle like my subjective experience. It just feels like I personally can handle things sometimes, the way that they are. And I just would rather put like, I don't know, some kind of spin to it. So
Yeah.
After that, I don't think that I have that habit as much anymore. But yeah, that's
So
yeah. I hope that was a good enough story. It was quite like long and like meandering, but
well, it was really evocative from a certain point of view. I mean, I love this piece of you were holding internally a vision of how everyone else's life was going to turn out well.
mm-hmm.
And that vision got disappointed.
Mm-hmm.
And the reality was that it didn't turn out well for everyone. And, some people went to jail, some people got knifed, some people just didn't fulfill their dreams, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, I'm hearing a kind of just fundamental grief about that. And so I guess my question is, I hear you acknowledging that your fantasy and the reality didn't match up, but what helped you face the truth of it or process the feeling that came up around it, and where are you at with
I
it
think
now?
yeah. So I think the feeling is just like the core wound of 7, right? It's just like this feeling of being trapped in life, or whatever. Because
Mm-hmm.
if you kind of get to the core thing about that story, it's just I think I just had a tidal wave of thinking of like realizing that I thought that we had infinite possibilities, but actually like there are ways that we're limited, and
Yeah.
that things are whatever, things are not as open or free as I would like them to be, and
Right.
that's just going to be the situation for a lot of people. And yeah, and the way I got through it, I think I just kind of stopped doing that as much. I
Mm-hmm.
started seeing it as like as a negative thing that it was, because I did a lot of that stuff to kind of survive, or in my point of view, whatever, to survive sad stuff that I was seeing and I was personally experiencing. But I realized that was like a false narrative. Like I think I could have sixes survive childhood, you know what I mean? And they're not doing like the rose colored glasses thing. Like all the negative types survive childhood, or whatever, or survive hardship, have resilience. And with something that's essential to all human beings, like we do have resilience. We don't need to have our personality type going all the time in order to survive life, or I don't know, make it. We can actually just relax and realize, yes, it is what it is, but you also don't need to you don't need to do so much reframing for you to deal with what is. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, so I mean, I guess I want to get a little rubber meets the road. Like, you were depressed
Mm-hmm.
around the age of 19, 20,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And did you like did you see a therapist, or did you talk to people, or did you have some kind of way of confronting it in I guess maybe like a formal way, or was it just your own inner processing of meeting
Oh,
reality face on without reframing it?
I was, I probably should have gone to therapy. And I was scared to talk to people about it because I also don't like bringing, like, it's easy for me to talk about things. So maybe this is a positive outlook kind of thing. It's easy for me to talk
Mm-hmm.
about negative things when they're like not currently happening. Like when I'm at, like, after the thing is done and when I'm not like in the experience, it's easier because I guess it's like more of a mental thing, you know? It's like, oh, that was that.
Mm-hmm.
And, this is how I got out of it. So I definitely didn't
Mm-hmm.
tell anybody, I don't think. Not until a lot later. Um, but
Sure.
how did I get out of it? I think I really leaned on my secondary nine. I leaned into spirituality. Like I came back to that. I was like weirdly religious as a child. Like I did definitely believe in God and religious in that, like, I don't know if I was really good at doctrine or anything. I don't think I read anything, but I just had my own vibe of like, oh, God's watching me and I should be a good person. So I kind of leaned back into reconnecting with spirituality, reconnecting with the idea that um, that there's a lot of pain in life, but there's still beauty in it, despite the pain. And
Mm-hmm.
it's actually by trying to make everything better, you're actually just like flattening things out. I did a lot of journaling, and yeah, it was a slow thing. I don't know. I think it was just like a combination of a bunch of shit.
Mm-hmm.
Forcing myself to take walks, forcing myself to like, I did do like a lot of seven things in that, like I got like obsessed with wellness, like listening to all the podcasts or whatever. After I went through like the freaking Darth Vader depression, like, you know, where there's like, oh, and then also just realizing that my mind was creating it all. Like one thing that I was afraid of, actually this might be something to do with being a seven, is that when I got very depressed, I realized I'm like, dude, I'm having the same like four thoughts all day running on a loop, and they're
Mm-hmm.
all sad, you know? Um,
Yep.
and that was the first time I realized that like I can't actually trust my own thoughts, which might be a scary thing for everyone, but maybe especially for a head type. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I just actually had to just do things that I thought would make me feel better and kind of ignore what was going on, abandon
Mm-hmm.
it, and stop trying to think my way out of it because my thinking was failing me, just in the
Yeah.
same loop. Yeah.
Right.
Hmm.
Um, this is, I don't know if this is too much of a stretch to connect this, but it
Hmm.
almost feels like that's pulling in the seven as an assertive type there. Like, well, I'm just going to go do something now, to
Hmm.
what? To get out of this but like this, some energy gets summoned from within
Yeah.
to do. And like, if I were watching you during that time, like what would I have noticed you doing?
I went from like a catatonic depression into like a party girl phase. So you would see
Interesting.
that little
Okay.
you'd see that shift a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
And
Uh-huh.
then just and then whatever, I had a granola stage, whatever. Just trying on different identities and ways of being. um
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So you'd see I think in the beginning it was just a lot of just me forcing myself to go on walks. I did a lot of volunteering. That's how I ended up getting into the field. Like I'm in now, whatever. I volunteered at 1,000 different places because volunteering does make you feel better. And
Hmm.
yeah, just trying to force myself. I actually, there was a lot of doing happening because I realized that if I fill up my space with a bunch of shit, and it doesn't even have to be, um, I don't even need to be enjoying it. Like I took that off the table because it was like really, I couldn't feel fucking nothing. I was like numb. I don't have to
Hmm.
enjoy it, but I have to like actually just like do it. So there was a good stretch of time where like every fucking whatever stretch of time was like accounted for. Like I had something to do, you know.
Hmm.
Mhm.
You know, well, I have one question. What's it like sharing the story of your depression and the whole thing of it? are there any emotions that come up for you right
Well,
now
actually,
or in the telling of it?
I feel the awkwardness of my heart last because I'm like, dude, this is like the worst time of my life. I just like having a hard time, like, I don't know, like actually feeling the emotion. Like I do
Dropping into
know
it?
when
Yeah.
I,
Uh-huh.
yes, like when I got out
Hmm.
of it, like it was a very transcendent, or when I like the when I kind of realized like I'm actually starting to get better, like that was a very
Hmm.
transcendent and emotional time for me, and I was very healing and whatever. Opened up my idea of life. But I also just I feel like, oh my gosh, like I can't talk about it without making it like monotone. Just like very like this is what happened. Da, 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 I don't know. So I
Hmm.
guess how I feel is like maybe a certain level of discomfort. Mhm.
Right.
Mhm.
Um, I don't mean to be in whatever way about this, but like, how do you act? How do you know you're uncomfortable? What does it mean to be uncomfortable? What are you experiencing?
Um, so the hard types kind of deal with shame, right? And
Hmm.
I kind of only ever feel the three influence when it comes to the shame part, which is just like, oh my
Hmm.
gosh, like how did I get out of this? Like, or is this like a, uh, am I, am I being too, I don't know, fucking emo in this interview? like, or I don't know, just a certain level of just like, I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. So it's a struggle. Oh.
Sure.
Hmm.
It sounds like, I mean, this is sort of self-reflective in a maybe symbolic way.
Hmm.
Um, but my experience of you when you were telling that story was like I could feel a. So on the one level, there were the words you were sharing in the narrative thread,
Hmm.
um, but my experience of your energy was it was on the one hand searching for the memories and trying to put them together, but there was a kind of like I'm going to use the word uh, jitteriness or something like that, or like a um,
Yeah.
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 Um, does that resonate with you the way that you experienced it
Yeah. Yeah. It's just,
at the body level?
man, this is a good conversation because earlier on we were talking about that feeling of just like whatever being so incredibly unstimulated that,
Mm-hmm.
being brought to tears and like you
Mm-hmm.
just like I have to run away from this. That was like
Mm-hmm.
my entire life at that whatever point in my life,
Mm-hmm.
the whole thing was just like me trying to like run out of my beingness and just
Mm-hmm.
fucking feeling trapped in like a meat suit. Um, and so it's just like it's kind of like ghosts of like Christmas past. Like, I don't know, not the right saying, but like yeah, it's just like a ghostly hour of my life. I'm like, oh, those times, like yeah.
Right.
So I guess it does make me feel jittery. Hmm.
Right, right, right. And I just I wonder underneath that jitteriness is potentially that authentic feeling of the story that you were searching for in the telling of the story, or were kind of self-conscious that you weren't feeling, maybe. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, yeah, I know what you're saying. Um, yeah, I guess underneath the jitteriness, um, it's just like, oh gosh, it's just so devastating. I feel bad, Um, I feel, I feel bad looking back and seeing the stark contrast between what I was before that period of time, all that led up to that, whatever, and the reasons why I felt I needed to have like this intense like I wouldn't say it, maybe not as far as like fantasy world, but like bordering on that, you know what I mean? Like why was my imagination like so hyperdrive in order for me to deal with shit, and like trying to think
Yeah.
of like reasons why or whatever, and then just seeing like how freaking fast I fell, um into that place and how scared I was,
Mm-hmm.
being stuck whatever in that
Right.
place. Hmm.
Yeah.
It's just so it was like very very scary, yeah.
Yeah, I
Hmm.
feel it. And what strikes me about that whole thing, there are so many dimensions of your life and your story, but this particular thread of growing up the way you did, being at that school, experiencing or just seeing with clarity the unfairness of things, and then having your fantasy of things working out just not match the reality of, as time went on, you realize that things weren't working out for people. That whole thing feels like a form of, it brought you in contact with a kind of suffering that has, in a sense, defined your life trajectory. I mean, there's a depth to it, and I actually mean this in a complimentary way, like a beautiful way. This is the kind of, like, doing what you do now, and moving into volunteer work, and now community work, and local politics, like that. I mean, this is me, maybe as a social type, kind of braiding the threads together, but it feels like there's this really powerful undercurrent that is going under your life here. Does that feel right to you?
It does. It does feel right, because I think when you try to be a little bit more practical about things, like, the way you improve people's lives is not like, it's not like going after the individual. You kind of have to change things structurally
Mm-hmm.
and slowly. And so
Yeah.
that is why I got really addicted to volunteering, because I could see that I was changing things in people's lives, um,
Mm-hmm.
without having to, like, I don't know, like, just in a small, humble way, And that's something that I
Yeah.
keep reminding myself, to get back
Yeah.
down to earth, like, do things in a humble way, slow and steady, whatever. Because
Uh-huh.
I don't want to be apathetic, I think there's something between, like, being a complete idealist, because I see that swing in a lot of people. I don't think it's just Evans, like, people being complete idealists, whatever, and then swinging way hard into nihilism and just, like,
Yeah.
whatever, fuck everything. But there's a
Yeah.
sweet middle, right?
Yeah.
And so I definitely think that awakened that in me, and I could see that it would heal me, um, and that it was, like, honest. It's like an honest try at bringing positivity or whatever, instead of
Yeah.
just, like, no.
I love that phrase. An honest try at bringing
Yeah.
positivity. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, Also, just one thing I loved, addicted to volunteering. That phrase stood out to me. What
Oh
is,
yeah, because I was supposed to go to one thing, and then I just, like, kept, because like I said, like, I definitely still have my personality type. You know what I mean? It's like excess, whatever. But, like, I was supposed to just, like, do one thing, and I think I was at one community meeting, and again, it was the same thing. Everyone, it was a group of youths, whatever, people around my age at the time. I was 20, 19, maybe a little bit
Mhm.
younger, and then we all went in a circle, and it's just, like, basically fucking, like, the story of your life, like, but the highlight reel is, like, every bad thing that's ever happened to you. I was, like, so, like, oh my god, like, I want to fucking get out of here, fuck. Um, but
Mhm.
I ended up connecting with somebody at the same volunteering, you know, thing, and then we're like, oh, what about if we do, like, a joint kind of, like, event where this is kind of seven, I guess. Yeah, it's very seven.
Uh,
And a joint event where we bring both of the cultures of the people who are in this group, and we
mhm.
celebrate by doing this cultural exchange. We'll, like, paint something.
Beautiful.
We'll
Right.
do something cool stuff. Yeah, and then
Yeah.
that ended
Yeah.
up snowballing, and then it just got bigger and bigger and bigger.
Yeah. And
And
that
then
event was, that was the, um, I remember you told me that story before. It was basically like you were experiencing all this frustration and suffering, and you're like, well, let's do something that's positive and celebratory that brings these cultures together. Is
mhm.
my That was my understanding. Yeah. So
Yeah,
just giving
yeah,
context. Yeah.
yeah,
And that
yeah.
snowballed into, yeah.
It became like an organization, and then, it got
Mhm.
bigger and bigger, and then I
Right.
left for frustration reasons, because I'm like it's not enough, like, it's not big enough, whatever. So, I handed it
Mhm.
off to my the co-founder. But yeah, it was, that trajectory definitely started because of all that stuff. Yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Cool. Well, how are you feeling right this moment?
um Again, I don't know. I think um I feel weirdly vulnerable still.
Yep.
But yeah, I think okay. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, I I wonder about the last half hour of our conversation.
Mhm.
If this, I'm conscious of potentially this last half hour having been in territory that is otherwise mostly kind of skimmed over by motion and reframing and positive seven stuff. And
Mhm.
um, so what's it been like for you to be in this conversation? And also, is that true? Is
I
my
think
sense
it's
true?
true. I think it's
Yeah.
true. What I'm like thinking of right now is that it's kind of weird because I do think about this stuff quite a lot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know why talking about it is so much weirder, you know? Or actually, even just like you doing the hard reframing stuff, it does. I'm
Mm-hmm.
like, oh yeah, you know, yeah, yeah, it's definitely vulnerable. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah. Um, Thank you for being willing to do this and for going here with me. It's really beautiful to see. I experience a lot of depth in you, and it's very cool how it's not just the stereotype of seven as being kind of um, I don't know, skimming the surface and stuff, but like
Mhm.
this, I have a real sense of the soul of the seven here, like the transformation of suffering into action towards positivity and um, just what you're doing and what you've done for your own processing and also the contribution you're making to the world through your work. Um,
Mhm.
it's very beautiful to me. So thanks for sharing all that.
Oh, thank you.
You're
Thanks for
welcome.
asking. This is good processing for me. I'm like, oh, gosh, I have to figure out a way to like not be so uncomfortable talking about it. I'm like, oh god. Yeah.
um, is there anything else that you want to share before we close?
Um, I
Any
don't
final
think
thoughts?
so. My final thoughts. I really, this was a very enjoyable experience. Like, I definitely was afraid in the beginning. You know, I think I told
Mm-hmm.
you it's like being on a job interview. Definitely, I'm
Yeah,
like I have to represent the type
sure.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But hopefully I can't say that I represented sevens well, but I can say that I think that the two of us talking, um, I discovered more things about being a seven through our conversation. So I find that quite nourishing. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. This was fun.
Same. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay.
Awesome.